Leading up to the release of The Predator, I'm reviewing all three of the main movies in the Predator franchise: Predator, Predator 2, and Predators. We're in the second week, so we're talking Predator 2. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Sean Chandler, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate to that, you're probably in the right place, and we'd love it if you would join us down in the comment section as we talk about this franchise of classic action sci-fi movies. This one in particular should be interesting because it's got a bit of a divisive take from people. You got a lot of critics of this movie that's not an adequate follow-up to the original, and then it's also got a bit of a cult following amongst a certain group of people. You'll find out very shortly where I fall on that spectrum. With that said, let's get started talking about the good. For me, the absolute best thing about this movie is that it's not a rehash of the original. The easiest thing they could have done is get another batch of killers and take them to another forest jungle type setting, like another sequel in this franchise. You think, what's the total opposite of a jungle? You go to an urban metropolis. What's the different set of killers that you can get that are still interesting? A bunch of different types of drug lords and drug dealers and things like that. And that makes the movie have a very different feel to it while still having the element of the original that you like, which is the Predator killing a bunch of people. It does that in a totally different way. Along those same lines, Danny Glover is a totally different type of lead character from Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger and that entire set of characters in the original film are so over the top, so exaggerated in their machoism and their muscularity that they feel larger in life. You go to Danny Glover and he has a very much an everyman sort of vibe to him. He's a detective on a police force. It feels much more normal in that sense as opposed to the soldiers of fortune. And so it's a different type of character. It would have been easy for them to get someone like a Dolph Lundgren as the lead, but they didn't. They went with kind of the everyman cop lead character. Also, it ties into the first film the right way. And what I mean by that is that it would have been so easy for them to have some sort of forced cameo for Dutch or talk about Dutch on some mission battling predators or something like that, or make the movie even about that. That's not what they did. What they did was the logical conclusion, which is to say Dutch survived and would have told his story. And so people would have been aware that these predators were out there doing this stuff. And that's kind of how it ties into this movie, which expands the universe. It makes it interesting in a new way that there's people out there and there's government agencies aware of the predators and trying to figure out what to do with them and all of that fun stuff. Another thing is that this movie expands the mythology of the predators themselves, especially as you kind of move into the final little segment of the movie. You get a much better idea of how the predators interact with one another, what their honor code is, and there's little actions that kind of happen, especially involving a pistol, that imply this much bigger backstory that this has been going on for a very long time, and you'll start to understand how they kind of function, and it just adds this nice depth to it through little small actions. And one final thing, speaking of ways that this movie's kind of breaks off from the original, this movie's very much an 80s, 90s cop drama, which gives it an entirely different flavor and different perspective on the ways the Predator interact with things. It just makes for a unique film experience. With that said, we'll move on to the bad. And unfortunately with this one, I don't think that this movie works very well at all. I think all the ideas, the basic idea of when they were in that brainstorming session and they wrote, let's do it in an urban setting, we'll get someone like Danny Glover in the lead, it'll be like a cop drama, let's expand the mythology, all of that is great. But the execution itself, the script itself, the way it was directed, I think all of that falls flat and does not do justice to the previously established world that was created or even the ideas that are present in their own movie. So like I just mentioned, it's very much an 80s, 90s action cop movie. But it's the most generic, bland, cliche 80s, 90s cop movie besides the fact that the Predator is in it. Just at the core of the movie, it's about as tough as nails cop that gets into shouting matches with his boss because he plays by his own rules. And because he's so committed to his job, his wife left him. But when his partner gets killed, he's out for revenge and has to track down who's responsible. I mean, that is the most cliche plot for an 80s action movie that you can imagine. And that's what this movie is, except the killer just happens to be the The Predator. Even the cast seems like it was cherry-picked from better movies. You've got 3 cast members from Lethal Weapon, you've got one from Terminator, and you've got one from Die Hard, and that's just superficially speaking. I'm sure I could find some deeper cuts in there as well. It even has Jamaican voodoo drug lords, which was this really specific cliche of the year 1990. Steven Seagal's Marked for Death also had Jamaican voodoo drug lords as well, which just dates it very specifically to this one time period and a very specific style of action movie. I kind of feel bad for the director of this film because he's following up John McTiernan, one of the greatest action directors of this time period, and he's just not up to the challenge, and so the end result is a movie that by comparison feels so generic, bland, and just a product of its time. And like I said, there's a bunch of great ideas in the movie that just I don't think are executed particularly well. Specifically, the Gary Busey plotline about the government knowing about the predators. I loved it when they first put that idea out there, and then when it started to kind of go in that direction and we see where it was headed and they're like trying to freeze the predators, it was just like, oh, this is where you're going? This is not a good idea. This is not very interesting. And we all know it's going to go really badly, and of course, it goes really badly. And to get real specific, Bill Paxton gives a very weird performance for a very weird police officer character.
And all you gotta do is tee it hot and let it fly. Ow! That's solid perfect.
And lastly, there's some bad special effects in this movie. Towards the end of it, they try to do some stuff with some predators kind of decloaking while standing in some fog in it. It just looks bad. It doesn't look dated. It looks like that's a bad special effect at any point in time. This is a movie that I really want to like and want to enjoy, and on paper, I should even be able to enjoy it just as kind of a guilty pleasure, but it doesn't really work for me at all. How about you? I would love to hear your take on it down below in the comment section. Are you someone that actually likes this movie? Try and convince me, because I want to be convinced to like this movie. I want to like it more than I do because of the cast, because of the time period, because I love action movies, because it's a Predator movie. It just doesn't work for me, so I gotta score this one a C, and on an entertainment level, just a 5 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, check out that playlist to the left of all of my Predator reviews. Also check out this playlist of my rankings of some of my favorite 80s and 90s action movie franchises, and thank you for watching, and keep talking movies too much.